Thank you for being here. I'm Julie Hussey with the League of Women Voters, your moderator for this forum for candidates for South Carolina House Districts 110 and 112. This forum today is sponsored by the League of Women Voters of the Charleston area. The League is nonpartisan and does not support or oppose political candidates or parties. We ask our audience to turn off their audio and video during the forum so that we can best hear the candidates. The screen will be shown so that you can see the candidates and myself as they present their answers. League-sponsored forums are being we were trying to live stream it on Facebook. We definitely will be posting the video recording later for viewer on the League's Facebook page and on vote411.org, the League's voter information website. And now let me introduce the candidates. In the November 3rd general election, voters in South Carolina House Districts 110 and 112 will choose a candidate to represent them for a 4-year term. Here are our candidates. For District 110, we've got Miss Rebecca Nice Chigolani is the Democratic candidate, and we have Representative William Cogswell is the Republican candidate. For District 112, we have Mr. Daniel Brownstein, the Democratic candidate, and Mr. Joe Bustos, the Republican candidate. Our forum format is going to run like this. Candidates in alphabetical order by district will have 60 seconds for introductory statements. I will ask questions from the League and the public that were submitted in advance. During the forum, chat and Q&A will be turned off. No questions will be asked that are not directed to only one candidate of a personal or of a personal nature. Candidates will be called on by district to respond to questions. They have 90 seconds to respond. Candidates may make an additional 60-second comments after the other candidate for that district has responded. They can signal me by raising their hand. Each candidate will have 60 seconds for a closing statement in reverse order of the introductory statements. We ask that candidates use closing statements to summarize the issues they've already discussed and their vision for the position they seek. Our timer, Sarah Zachman, will signal candidates when they have 30 seconds remaining and when time is up. Now, let us begin with 60-second introductory remarks. And let's start with Ms. Chigolani for District 110.
Hello, hello, hello. Good afternoon. I'm Rebecca Nice Chigolani, and I'm here because I represent something South Carolinians have been asking for recently. Forward-thinking leadership through consciously and systematically creating policy and circumstances for all citizens to thrive. This is a moment in our history where we have an opportunity to pivot through our leadership. This is not about what we've been doing. This is about what we are choosing to do moving forward. There is much to do, and I am eager to be a part of creating abundant job opportunities, a sustainable environment, and supporting and uplifting education for our children. My commitment to District 110 is to make the Low Country a greener, more economically robust, and socially conscious place to inhabit while maintaining its charm. Thank you to the League of Women Voters and to the people watching that took their time today to be with us.
Thank you. Mr. Cogswell?
I believe you're muted, Ms. Representative Cogswell.
Does my time start over? Thanks again for having me. It's good to be on this, and it's nice to meet my opponent actually virtually. It's the first time we've actually laid eyes on one another, so welcome. Again, William Cogswell, represented the District 110 for 2 terms now. Just a little bit about myself. My wife Lucille and I live downtown. We have 2 children. For my day job, I'm in the real estate business and do adaptive reuse and clean up brownfield sites like the cigar factory, the Garco mill, and stuff on the Navy Yard. Why I got into politics and why I want to keep going with this is because there's a lot happening in our district. We need help and we need strong representation in Columbia. I feel like I have the skill sets and now experience to really bring home the proverbial bacon, so to speak, because we need help with everything that's happening. So my initiatives are protect our quality of life, and among other things we'll get into. Thank you.
Thank you. And first of all, I want to say that Sarah is actually Heidi today. So thank you, Heidi, for helping with the timing. Anyway, so now let's go to Mr. Brownstein for District 112.
Thank you all for having me. Thank you to the League of Women Voters. It's great seeing my fellow candidates here as well. My name's Daniel Brownstein. I'm the Democratic nominee for our State House district. I have two children, an 8-year-old and a 7-year-old who are in our public schools at Whitesides Elementary. And the reason that I'm running this race is because of them. This past March, through a failure of leadership at all levels, it seemed like our world was crumbling alongside of us. And I flashed back to that moment in the hospital where I met my children for the first time. You look into their eyes and you just think of the incredible opportunity and promise that their life, that lies ahead of them in their life. Fast forward to this past March, and I really began to question for the first time ever whether my children would have the same opportunity that I had, whether all of our children would have the same opportunity that we had. So I believe it's time for fresh leadership, and I'm in this race to protect our environment, prioritize our schools, and to provide strong leadership during the COVID pandemic. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Mr. Bustos.
There. Thank you. I'm Joe Bustos, Republican candidate for District 112. My wife and I are lifelong residents of Mount Pleasant. I went to public schools, went in the Army in 1970, married in 1971. I retired from the Army in 1995, and my wife and I couldn't think of a better place to come back to than Mount Pleasant. Shortly after that, I was engaged in politics, and I've served 13 years on Mount Pleasant Town Council. We love this area. We both grew up here. We're familiar with it. As a matter of fact, a large portion of District 112 I've already represented as a member of the Mount Pleasant Town Council. So I'm familiar with the challenges that the islands and Mount Pleasant have, and I can take that knowledge to Columbia and work to help alleviate some things such as poor drainage, our infrastructure. I want to work on education, and last but certainly not least, conservation, because this area is very sensitive and we need to work hard to preserve it.
Thank you.
Thank you.
All right, well, let's begin with some questions. So we're going to kind of do the opposite order that we did again. So Mr. Bustos, I'm going to start with you with District 112. And this first question is, why do you believe you're better qualified than your opponent to represent the citizens of your House district?
Well, I believe I'm better prepared, and it all is summed up in one word: experience. As I said, I've been a lifelong resident of the Low Country, except for the time I was in the Army, and I learned a lot of great leadership skills in the Army. I enlisted as a private, and I retired as a lieutenant colonel. I have a good education through public systems. I have a master's degree from Central Michigan University. And I also spent 13 years, as I'd said before, on Mount Pleasant Town Council. I know about the drainage. I know about the infrastructure. I know the people. I know the islands. And all that experience right now, I won't have to go and relearn. From day one, when I go to the legislature, I'll be able to address what the needs are of the district. As I said, I've represented probably over half of it, the portion in Mount Pleasant. We have some challenges: drainage, infrastructure, just a number of things that we need to work on. And I want to go to Columbia to try to get us the things we need, so we'll have the wherewithal to correct them going forward. So summing everything up, it's experience. Thank you.
Thank you. Mr. Brownstein?
Yes, thank you very much for that great question. I've spent the last 14 years, most of my adult life here in the Low Country, giving back to my community. That included working as a newspaper reporter, working for 5 years for a solicitor's office here in South Carolina, making improvements to our criminal justice system so that it's equitable and that also it produces a more favorable outcome, a safer society. I've also given back and helped domestic violence and sexual assault victims for the past 6 years as a member of the board of directors of the South Carolina Coalition Against Domestic Violence and Sexual Assault. I've also served a term on the Charleston County Criminal Justice Coordinating Council. I have real experience in Columbia. I successfully lobbied in 2012 for an anti-human trafficking bill. And then in 2015, the budget that I wrote on behalf of all of our state solicitors was approved and added 104 solicitors, prosecutors to each county in the state. So my aim is to be accessible, to be responsive, and to be proactive, and to draw on my experience here in South Carolina as a working dad with 2 children in elementary school to make a difference in the ways that it's going to impact all of the residents of our district. Thank you.
Thank you. And now let's go to District 110. Mr. Cogswell, why do you believe that you're better qualified than your opponent to represent the citizens of your House district?
Well, I can't say I know a lot about my opponent, again, because this is the first time we've met. But with regards to my experience, I can tell you that some of the major issues that are facing the Low Country, from my perspective, are infrastructure needs, flooding relief, and conservation. I have one of the highest records, if not the highest record in the legislature with the League of Conservation Voters from my sponsorship on various initiatives related to protecting our natural environment. I was a lead sponsor on the recent infrastructure bill. And another critical issue that is going to be important, especially in the upcoming session, is redistricting. And we probably will get into that a little bit later. But in order to get something that I support wholeheartedly, which is independent redistricting, we really need Republican help on that bill, given the majority of the House members being on the Republican Party. And I'm happy and really willing to try and shepherd that through, because I think it's such a critical item facing our district. So again, I go back to Mr. Bustos' point. Experience does matter. All politics is local. And I've been up there for 4 years, have the business background. And I think what I've done in my voting record to date really does reflect the district. And I plan on continuing that if the voters see fit to reelect me.
Thank you. Ms. Chingalani?
Yes, thank you for that question. Again, I haven't met William, and quite frankly, I think that comparing each other in that way can kind of be detrimental to what it is that he has done and his position. So I'll just tell you a little bit about myself. And I have had a lot of different experience in my lifetime. I've lived in a lot of different places. So I've seen how the impact of certain legislation can impact the area very much so. And when I see what's happening here, the things that are in front of us as far as conservation, as far as infrastructure, our environment, for sure, our education is huge. We have that $26 billion deficit for our retirement fund for our teachers that really no one's talking about. And I'm frankly appalled and surprised, because these people that are supposed to be educating our children don't necessarily feel safe and supported. So until that happens, we really can't say that we're doing everything that we can as far as education is concerned. I just feel a real commitment to making sure that our environment, every decision that we make, we need to be asking, what is the impact to our environment, and having a plan in order for each step of the way. And how does that fit in with education, and how does that fit in with equity? Thank you.
Thank you very much. All right, well, let's talk a little bit more about the environment, and we will go with this question. And we're going to start with District 110, and we'll go in reverse order. So Mr. Cogswell, the question is this: what do you have specifically in mind for advancing clean energy in South Carolina as wind, solar, and even sweet potatoes for ethanol could bring sustainable jobs to our state? Hey, don't forget that mute button. I keep doing that myself.
I'm very proud of being one of the main sponsors for this recent solar legislation that we passed last year, which again was a big move, but what I would call a big first step. There's a lot more opportunity in the green energy sector, and I think South Carolina is well positioned to be a leader in that area. Some of the things that are critical to me are making sure, we don't know keeps going back and forth with regards to offshore drilling and what's happening on the federal level, but a bipartisan group of legislators led by people on the coast, myself included, have been adamant about rejecting the notion of any sort of offshore drilling or any sort of testing offshore, to the point where we have put out legislation that would restrict at the state level any sort of infrastructure being located on the coast of our state, to prohibit that kind of use going on off our waters, which I think would wreck the economy. So again, a lot left to do, a lot of opportunity, and excited to be part of it. So.
Thank you. Ms. Chingalani?
Yes, thank you. We do have a long way to go, and that legislation that William Cogswell was speaking about is a great first step. We also need to take steps towards making sure that we have the ability for those solar companies to come in with giving them an amount that their energy is worth, so they can feel like that there is an investment in South Carolina. We don't have that yet. And also planning for what we're going to do with our nuclear power plants long term. Setting goals, sticking to them, and really not just saying this is what I'd like to see have happen, but making it a goal and step by step meeting those goals. And if we're not, why? And how can we catch up? And how can maybe we meet our goals early? I think it's critical that we don't just say we're going to do this, but that we actually do it. As for the offshore drilling, I think most people can say that is something that we don't want. Me living in California, seeing what that looks like, I understand how that does impact the economy and what that does look like when you're looking out at the ocean. So I very much support any steps or measures to make sure that that doesn't happen, and that communicating with our neighboring states to allow what it is that we're doing to have more of an impact. Because if we're all in it together, then we have a lot more as far as our strength with each other.
Thank you. And now let's do the same question. What do you have specifically in mind for advancing clean energy in South Carolina as wind, solar, and even sweet potatoes for ethanol could bring sustainable jobs to our state? Mr. Brownstein.
Thank you very much for that great question. Number one, the thing that we can do in South Carolina is to close our coal burning power plants. I'm not sure if our viewers know, but we have 5 coal burning power plants in South Carolina. They're all within 100 miles of Charleston. And the one that's closest to us is the biggest. And it's important to note, we take out 95% of the pollution that comes out of that plant, yet it is still spewing greenhouse gases and other substances into our atmosphere. It burns between 3 and 4 million tons of coal each year and releases 3,500 tons of sulfur dioxide, nitrogen oxides, and 9 million tons of carbon dioxide. Right now in South Carolina, we have a tremendous leverage over our utilities thanks to the nuclear debacle. And we need to use that leverage to force our utilities to close those coal burning power plants in favor of renewable energy like solar and wind. Mr. Cogswell did reference the Energy Freedom Act that was passed, and that was a great first step. But what's holding us back right now is that companies want to put in these large solar installations or large wind installations. And in order for that to happen, in order for them to get the financing, they need a 10-year commitment about what rate they're going to be paid for the energy that they produce. And so that's what we need to go about doing this January when I'm elected to Columbia. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Mr. Bustos, same question.
Thank you. There's no doubt that excuse me, there's no doubt that South Carolina has made great strides towards securing renewable energy. Right now, we're the third largest producer of nuclear power. 83% of people in South Carolina believe that solar and wind power is important to the future of South Carolina. So when you have people convinced that it needs to be done, that is something that I feel the legislature will make happen. We have over 1,200 electric vehicles in South Carolina. So we're making strides and we're moving forward. We need to keep that momentum going. But as has been mentioned, the coast and drilling off the coast it just can't happen. That can't be done because the coast is so fragile. And Sullivan's Island, Isle of Palms, Mount Pleasant would all suffer from any type of oil drilling accident. So I don't think that's going to happen. And there's also legislation not to have facilities that would accommodate drilling. So I think we're moving in the right direction, and we need to capitalize on that momentum to keep moving forward and to reduce our emissions and keep working towards clean energy. Thank you.
Thank you. All right, let's keep on this topic for a little bit and start talking about transportation infrastructure. And so we're going to, part of the switch up is to make sure everybody kind of has a chance to start at the very beginning, and then one kind of has a chance to come at the very end. So we're going to start this one with Mr. Brownstein and District 112. And the question is, what is your position on widening I-526? If you oppose widening, what is your solution to ease traffic congestion largely caused by container trucks traveling between Long Point Road and Virginia Avenue?
That's a great question. I am in favor of widening 526. I think that anybody who has driven that stretch of roadway is in favor of it because it's a mess. Number one, we have a problem with the James Bell Bridge being outdated and past its prime. I'm sorry, the James B. Edwards Bridge, I should say, which is that first bridge to Daniel Island. That one is structurally deficient and needs to be replaced anyway. But, you know, it just cannot take people an hour to drive the 7 miles from Mount Pleasant to North Charleston. I mean, my gosh, if you want to get somewhere in North Charleston at 5:30 or 6 o'clock on a weekday, you better leave an hour early. And I work with some people here in Mount Pleasant who spend 2 hours of their day in the car commuting back and forth. And that's just unacceptable. It's a huge waste of resources and productivity. And if you just think of those folks spending 2 hours of their day, that's 2 hours they don't have with their family and to you know, get their kids ready for bed at night. So, you know, we have a problem here with emissions and contributing to climate change. And that would also be solved by widening 526, which absolutely must be a priority as we move forward.
Thank you. Mr. Bustos.
Yes, 526 does need to be widened, but in that process, we need to be very careful about the wetlands that it goes over and the danger or the damage that can be done. I know when we were building Johnny Dodds Boulevard and we were looking at overpasses, the engineers found that the water that would drain from the overpass would accelerate at such a rate that it would take oil and antifreeze and other pollutants into Shem Creek simply from the acceleration of the water. So these are things we have to look at. We can't just say we're going to do it and do it. And not only that, we need to look at 526, or correction, I-26, and make sure that it's wide enough that we're not pumping so much traffic into I-26 that I-26 cannot handle it. And we wind up with the classic 4 lanes going into 2, which, as some of you probably know, in South Carolina, that happens, and it's not fun. So the entire system, because of the Wando port and also the Leatherman port, transportation is going to be important. Also, we need to look at rail facilities, and I think we need to work to integrate the rail facilities. Rails are more efficient than trucks, and we need to work on that system so that we can carry more containers efficiently to distribution points, perhaps further toward the middle of the state.
Thank you. All right, now let's go to District 110, and we will begin with Miss Chingalani.
Thank you. It's an important question to ask, and I am for widening I-526, but with this caveat, it has to be with other things that are put in place that, one, protect the environment, the wetlands. You are correct, Joe Bustos, that is hugely important. But also with regard to equity, we have an opportunity with widening this where we could put in bus lanes that allow for transportation of people who maybe can't afford cars or even afford to have that traffic time. That's really huge for people who maybe can't even have children in daycare. So those little things are really important that we're taking into account, as well as, so it could be a bus lane, it could be a train, but some sort of public transportation should be put with that, not just a widening of the lanes for more cars to get congested again in a couple of years. Also, some sort of possibly an incentive for businesses to have some of their employees work at home, even if that's just certain days of the week or whatever, just so that we're taking some of those cars off the road. We all saw the impact of having those cars off the road during the pandemic and how good that was for our environment and how good it was for us to move about when we really needed to. So those are definitely things that we need to think of while we're widening that road. Thank you.
Thank you. Mr. Cogswell?
Sure. I can say that, it's easy to say that we should widen 526. That makes a lot of sense. But you've heard the line that widening roads is like going on a diet by loosening your belt. I mean, it's really not going to solve the problem. My opponent has some really good ideas and some concepts that she just laid out that I think make sense. But, if we are able to get the widening of that 526 bridge, it's going to cost an exorbitant amount of money. We don't have a lot of friends, frankly, in the rest of the state being willing to put money down in the low country, even though we provide most of the income to the state, which has been one of my biggest pet peeves, so to speak, things that I keep pointing out, but not everyone listens. But we also, to Mr. Bustos' point, really need to be creative. I mean, the new Leatherman terminal that's being built in North Charleston has a major rail yard connected to it. And I've met with the port, and they are planning on barging over containers to that terminal so that they can have access to rail. I mean, these are kind of creative solutions to take the problem and address it. Incidentally, that issue or that plan would cost about $100 million versus over $1 billion for a wider bridge. So we have to think about the economics, be very pragmatic on how we address these things, and work with the local players, especially the port, to help put these plans into motion.
Thank you. All right, let's go. Let's now start talking a little about health. And the first question we've got is, do you support or oppose Medicaid expansion for South Carolina? And explain, and we'll start with you, Ms.
I do believe that expanding Medicaid is really important. The way that it's set up is if we expand it, the federal government will pay 90% of it. And as a state, we have to come up with the other 10%. It doesn't mean that that is still not a lot of money when it comes down to it, but we are one of the very last states to do it. And all along the way, the other states have figured out how to do it. So this again is an opportunity for us to expand the way that we're doing, try to come up with some creative thinking to make it happen. And I do believe that we can, but we also have to be conscientious and make sure that we figured out a way to financially support it before we do it. But we also have to have leaders that are in there that want to make it happen, are on every day thinking about this, the impact of not doing it and how it strains all of our other resources and all of the other divisions. So I do believe this is a really, really important point that we make sure, especially during the pandemic, we saw the impact of this. So it should be a priority for sure. Thank you.
Thank you. Mr. Cogswell.
Again, I do support the concept of expanding simply because if the money's there from the federal level, which it is, we should try and take advantage of that. I think it's somewhat wasteful or really not looking at the big picture to try and take advantage of it. Now, again, though, we do need to contribute as a state. I can tell you though, and right now, that would be a challenge to even come up with our small percentage because of what's going on with the budget due to COVID. And I'm not sure that it is, at least for me personally, it's not my number one priority. I think when we do have the budget back to where it was pre-COVID, then absolutely. But right now, I think we have more pressing issues, like, for example, getting the pay raises to our teachers that they so desperately need, especially given what's going on. So again, I'm for it. I think it makes good business sense, but I'm also pragmatic enough to know where our state budget is currently, and we need to be able to prioritize things and know what we can and can't afford. So that would be my perspective on it right now.
Thank you. And now let's go to District 112. Mr. Bustos.
Okay, thank you. Well, there's no doubt that at this very moment, between the pandemic and the unemployment, we have the perfect storm on our hands with people who are unemployed, needing medical assistance, needing insurance. So for those reasons, I would support expanding it. However, we need to be nimble enough that as employment goes back up, we'll be able to shrink that Medicaid. And of course, I think that will happen naturally because people will be getting jobs. They'll get their own insurance of their preference, and the need for Medicaid will come down. But right now, during this time, as Mr. Cogswell said, and I think he's correct, I'm in favor of it, and I think it's something we need to do as we work through this pandemic and get people employed again. Thank you.
Thank you. All right, we are going to, Mr. Brownstein, let's get your answer on this one.
Thank you very much. I definitely support the expansion of Medicaid. As Mr. Bustos just pointed out, we are in a pandemic, and a lot of folks have lost their jobs, and with that, they've lost their health insurance. This is precisely the time when people need access to high quality care. And so I think Medicaid is a way for us to accomplish that goal. We do get a lot of bang for our buck in that the federal government picks up 90% of the tab. If we did expand Medicaid today, it's estimated that about 400,000 South Carolinians would have health insurance. 400,000. And a lot of those folks are in our rural communities and areas where there aren't a lot of options for medical care. We've lost 4 rural hospitals in the past decade or so. And we have many more that are financially threatened. And that's because the populations that they serve just don't have health insurance. So I'm absolutely in favor of it. I think it's something that we need to move rapidly towards. And I think that by doing it, we will be doing our state a great service in terms of our health and also our financial well-being. Because if you look at it, medical expenses are one of the number one reasons that people declare bankruptcy. Thank you.
Thank you very much. All right, let's go to our next question. I'm going to keep it on health a little bit, and let's talk a little bit about the pandemic. So we've been dealing with it, and obviously we're still dealing with it. But I'd like to hear kind of your suggestions for managing this pandemic, and then also preparing for future pandemics in the future. And we will start this with Mr. Bustos, District 112.
Okay. Well, the pandemic handed us a set of circumstances that no one had really dealt with before. You know, in the Army, we always planned for mass casualties. We planned for chemical attacks, biological attacks. And in my mind, this was something akin to a biological attack. And it was an unknown that was handed to us. And I think that the people in authority now have had to do a little trial and error work. It's working out for the most part. We do see our numbers going down, but I think a lot of people were caught a little off guard because of what biological agent or virus was introduced. But afterwards, we need to do a good after action review to see what was done correctly, what was done incorrectly, and then to make plans based on that. My personal feeling is that the medical community as well as the government was caught off guard. And when you didn't have people giving the leadership solid information, which I think they were giving as best they had or thought, we're finding now a little further downstream that it wasn't exactly correct. And that's why we have masks, no masks. Now they're saying it's more dangerous for people to stay inside, and they're encountering mental issues and drug issues and domestic violence issues.
Thank you.
So all these things need to be put together, and we need to do a after action review of the entire thing so that we know how the next time this happens. And there will probably
Thank
be
you,
a
Mr.
next
Bustos.
time.
Thank you, Mr. Bustos. Let's go to Mr. Brownstein.
Well, I'm going to have to take issue with one thing that Mr. Bustos says is our numbers are not going down. In fact, they're going up. We're above 1,000 cases for the first time in a bit of time, and we're seeing that other states are also increasing. So I believe we are currently in the midst of this pandemic, and it's probably going to get worse before it gets better. I also have to take issue that we didn't have the plans to address it. South Carolina received a lot of federal money after September 11th to plan for precisely this event. And what did we do with that plan? We put it on the shelf and we forgot about it. That's what we did. DHEC came into this crisis with their infectious disease unit down 20%. So we were hobbled from the very beginning when dealing with this pandemic. There are some things that we can do that we must do at the state level to address it. The first thing is we need widespread testing that's accurate and has a quick turnaround time. In order for us to isolate people who have this virus, they need to know that they have it. And the current testing delays that we're seeing in some facilities are unacceptable, and they're counterproductive to that effort. The second thing that we need is we need to do contact tracing out of DHEC and determine who has the virus and who's been exposed to it, and make sure that those folks are staying separate from the rest of society so that we're quarantining that virus and not spreading it to others. And then third, we need a consistent state policy when it comes to wearing a mask and social distancing. Right now, we're leaving our public health policy setting up to our communities, and that's leading to inconsistencies that leaves pockets for the virus to breed. Thank you very much.
Thank you. All right, let's go over to District 110, and let's start with Mr. Cogswell.
there's no doubt that the virus caught the whole country off guard, and we've learned a lot of valuable lessons, both on how to prepare for something like this, and what to do and what, frankly, not to do. I agree with Mr. Brownstein's points that we definitely in the state of South Carolina we are not out of the woods. I wouldn't say that we are, we haven't had a lot of progress, but we do need rapid testing, more rapid testing. That needs to happen. And I think DHEC was certainly caught flat-footed. But I also think as we learn things about this virus, both locally and national and internationally, we need to be able to better communicate what the realities of this virus are, because I feel like there's a lot of misinformation that's out there that confuses people what they can and can't do. And we understand that, things that we thought were positive, 3, 4, 5 months ago might not exactly be the case now. So education and having a clear point of contact that's a trusted point of contact, and ideally that should come through DHEC, needs to happen. I think to Mr. Bustos' point, we absolutely need to do an analysis on what we can do better, because I agree this is going to be something that will continue. And then I think finally on the economic front, we need to be prepared for what this is going to do at the state level, and be putting money aside for taking care of the basic needs of our state in case this thing is prolonged.
Thank you. Ms. Chingalani.
Thank you. Really and truly, everything that William Cogswell and Daniel Brownstein, I completely agree with. So I'm going to take this a little bit in a different direction, in that all of those things I believe are important, but on the most basic level, we also need to address the poverty cycle, because when our citizens are in a better position to start with when these sort of things happen, then the impact isn't as great. So there are a lot of individuals that do not have the family legacy of thriving to lift them out of these situations. So as a society, we must be able to find a viable way to assist them before occurrences like this happen. And most importantly, because people make better decisions when their basic needs are met, when they have a reliable roof over their head, when they have food in their bellies, and when they have employment they enjoy. So this is really a wholesome approach. There are all of these other issues that the pandemic brought up that are important, but we would fare better if this was addressed. Also, the other component of this is the education component. For a long time, I have thought that distance learning should already have happened. And I know that we're using it as a bridge until we can get back in schools. But I also think that distance learning is really important as our social structure is changing, and then how we're working is changing. We need to address that and keep that in the mix as well. Thank you.
Thank you. And kind of building on that question, I want to ask, I'm going to try to get in 2 more questions. And the first one, I'd like to talk about education. Or get you to talk about education even better. So the question is, do you support reforming the funding mechanism for public education in our state? And what changes, if any, would you make? And we will go with Mr. Cogswell, District 110.
Yes, I mean, our funding mechanism for education in the state of South Carolina is flawed. As to what to do with Act 388, that is, the hundreds of millions dollar question, frankly. But I think we first need to start with before we get into the funding mechanism, I think we need to finish what we've started with the education bill that the House and Senate have been working on for the past 2 years. I think it has evolved in a good way. It started in the House, had a lot of input from the teachers that changed the House bill. The Senate also beat it up, and I think it needed to be cleaned up. And so we've gotten to a point where I think that bill is ready to be signed into law, that has the buy-in from the teachers in both chambers, and the governor supports it. So we need to make sure that happens, and we need to make sure that we get our teachers the pay raise that they deserve. And then the other component is I think we need to make sure we can recruit teachers by giving them additional funding for getting the graduate degree. So getting back to Act 388 and how to do that, once we have been able to pass this first part of the overhaul, then I think we really need to study hard how to do that. But I mean, I can just tell you, it is not an easy solution, because anything away from Act 388 is going to mean more property taxes on homeowners, which will not be very well received across the state.
Thank you. Miss Chingalani?
Thank you. Yes, I think William Cogswell is correct in saying that we do need to find different ways, creative ways to fund education in more robust ways. Even the more revenue streams that we pull from, the easier it is if one falls out. So if we can widen that, I think we'll fare a lot better. But I do believe, I'm going to hit this point again because it's important, that we also need, as we're doing that, to address that $26 billion in the teachers' retirement fund. It's important because they're putting 9% of their salaries into that fund. Every paycheck, 9% of it goes into there, and they're not contributing to Social Security. So it's not like they have something to fall back on. So I think we need to prove to our teachers that we support them. In addition to that, of course, they do need pay raises, but they also need the space to have the creativity to think about education differently. They're so, especially this year, they're so caught up in the cycle of just keeping up with what's happening that they don't have that time to really say, what can I do to capture more kids' attention while they're in the classroom? Not everyone learns the same. I definitely do not learn the same as most other people. And so I know that for me, in my experience, I was one of those people who missed out a little bit. So I think there's a lot of things that we can do and should be thinking about and actively pursuing.
Thank you. All right, let's go to District 112 and Mr. Bustos.
I believe education is one of the most important things we have to do in government, because our children are our future. And I believe in South Carolina, well, to get right to the question, yes, we do need to find a better way or an additional way to fund education. I think minimally adequate is not the right answer. I think we need to aim a lot higher than that. If we aim low, we'll hit low. And we need to improve education. And as we improve education and improve the circumstances for teachers and the schools, we'll produce better graduates, which will actually be better for the state, because more businesses will want to come to South Carolina because they'll be able to recruit better workers. And we'll have more college graduates coming back to the schools and teaching students. Everything evolves around that, I believe. And I think we need to improve it. I think we're, as I said, minimally adequate is just too low. We need to improve it. We need to raise the bar, but we need to raise that bar across the entire state. And while we're very fortunate in Mount Pleasant and the islands and our districts to have great schools in Mount Pleasant, east of the Cooper, we have great schools. We have great parents, and parents are involved, but that's not everywhere in the state. And we need to somehow get to that. And we need to give teachers better pay. We need to have them able to live in a community like Mount Pleasant.
Thank you. Thank you. Appreciate that. All right, let's go to Mr. Brownstein.
Sure. For those of you who don't know, Act 388 was a compromise that took the operations of schools off of our owner-occupied property taxes and created a sales tax, and then also continued to have businesses and investor properties pay for school operations. I believe that we are best served when everybody is paying into our school districts, especially those of us who have children in the schools. It's counterintuitive that I have 2 children in elementary school, yet I am not paying through my property taxes to support that elementary school. With that being said, raising taxes during a pandemic is not a prudent financial plan. And so I think that unfortunately, the changing of Act 388 is going to have to wait. But I think that we can do some things in the meantime. We can pass an education reform bill out of Columbia that guarantees every child in South Carolina, no matter their zip code, a quality 21st century education. We can raise teachers' salaries. We can reinstate the stipend for teachers who are nationally board certified for their particular subject, which is quite a distinction. We can also recruit
you.
new teachers to the field.
I'm cutting you off a little bit. I'm sorry.
I didn't
Those
see
are
the
good
time.
ideas. I'm gonna let you get to them in the end a little bit because I wanted to really squeeze in one more question and I just felt like if we don't squeeze in, so this one we're probably gonna go, Heidi, if we could just kind of go for 60 seconds on this one, because then we're gonna need to get into our your final statement. I want you to have a chance for that, but I really don't want this to pass without some thoughts about race. And so I really would like to ask kind of what measures would you support enhancing race relations in our district and state? And we'll start with you, Mr. Bustos, District 112.
Okay. I think, I spent 5 years on the police department in the city of Charleston, and I worked with poverty and a lot of victims. I think we need to make sure that everyone feels they're being treated equally. And I think that needs to be everywhere. And I think improving education and making sure that every child has an equal opportunity to get education. And it's important that the parents get involved. I think one of the things that makes education for the younger people and on both sides, whether it's minority family or not, parents being involved and seeing the success of their children will improve race relations. But if any family feels that they're being held back, that will be a goal that will never be achieved.
Thank you, Mr. Brownstein.
Sure. To change the racial dynamics that we have, we need to guarantee everybody equal opportunity. And unfortunately, that's not occurring in our state and our country. I've worked in the criminal justice system in some pretty distressed areas of the state. And what I can tell you is that we are operating under 2 different systems and 2 different ways of life. There's the criminal justice system for folks who have money, and then there's the criminal justice system for folks who don't. And the outcomes of those are drastically different. So in order to confront this challenge, I think that we need to make sure that our system is treating everybody fairly. And then the second component goes back to education. It is not right that we can predict a student's outcome by their 3rd grade reading level and the zip code where they live. We need to make sure that every child, no matter what part of the state that they live in, has access to high quality education, and that will be our great equalizer.
Thank you. All right, let's go to District 110 and we will start with Mr. Cogswell.
Yeah, thank you. It's an important question given what's going on. I would say that Mr. Brownstein's point on criminal justice reform is an absolute long-term goal we should have, and we should put that into motion immediately. I would agree with Mr. Bustos that education and economic development, especially in the poorer areas of our state, is critical. But I do think there are 2 initiatives that can be taken into account on the immediate term, and that is there's a hate crimes bill that's in the legislature right now that I'm a sponsor on. I think that needs to have bipartisan support, and we should pass it. So I'm going to work to make sure that happens. And then the other one, which is not necessarily race related, but the Equal Rights Amendment, which I mentioned earlier, that's something that I think I'm surprised we haven't passed that at the state level, and it's something that I'm 100% in support of. So we have 3 long-term goals and 2 short-term. That would be my position on it.
Thank you very much. Ms. Chingalani?
Yes, thank you. I think everyone who's already spoken has said some pretty good stuff, but I'm going to add a few things. I don't believe that it's policy alone that's going to change this issue. It's got to be in the hearts and the minds of all of our leadership and how they conduct themselves and what it is that we're bringing forward every day. And because every day it's changing, when we look back 5 years from now, we're going to be able to see the progress that has happened, and the response that we have 5 years from now is going to look very different than it is now. But in order to get there, we have to every day make steps towards this. It's not a long-term goal. It's now. This is the time. Now is the time to have this change. We have people like Ben Pogue and his restorative justice. We have people like Kristen for sheriff that are willing and able and ready to make these changes. So it's not long-term, that it begins now, because there is no other issue that's more important. Thank you.
Thank you very much. That's wonderful. All right, well, now before we get to closing statements, I'm gonna give the candidates just a moment to take a breath. And so I can give a little voting information, and then we can kind of prepare for the end. So now we've got some voting information to share. I just want to remind everybody that the elections are November 3rd. But you can also vote early, in person, absentee, by mail, and of course on November 3rd. So we just really encourage you to make your voting plan. A lot of voting rules have changed in 2020, including options for how, when, and where you can vote. Now is a great time to check your voter registration on vote411.org, the League's nonpartisan voter information website, and make sure that you are ready to participate in this upcoming election. Also on Vote 411, you can learn about the candidates you'll be voting on, compare their responses to League questions, find your voting place, and learn about COVID-related voting changes. It's also a great place to kind of prepare your sample ballot, so when you go in, you're ready to vote. Early voting by mail and in person is underway now. For voting times and locations, visit your county election office website or the voting page on the League's website, lwvcharleston.org. To request an absentee ballot, contact Charleston County Election Office at 843-744-VOTE. I think the Mount Pleasant is going to have a voting location at Seacoast Church for everybody, absentee in person, that opens up tomorrow, the 19th. So I just encourage y'all to know about that. And now it's time for us to go to our closing 60-second statements. And we're going to go in reverse order from the opening statements. So we'll go with that, and we will begin with District 112, and we're going to begin with Mr. Bustos.
I'm sorry. Thank you very much. And I just want to express my appreciation to the League of Women Voters for doing this to get information out to the voters. So thank you very much. And the fellow candidates, thank you for taking part in this. In closing, I think the only thing that I would like to emphasize is, I think because of the situation with the pandemic, unemployment, and many other things, that my experience will hold me in good stead going to the State House. I've worked for the people of Mount Pleasant for 13 years. I've lived in this area all my life, with the exception of the time I was in the Army. And it's a great area. And I think it's a great place to live. And people appreciate it and enjoy it. And the parents and the schools and the teachers are good, but we can be better. And I think the whole idea of constant improvement is one that we need to embrace, because if we're going to move South Carolina forward, which I think we will, it's going to have to be a constant improvement going forward. Thank you.
Thank you. Mr. Brownstein.
Thank you very much for having me. I started out this campaign by mailing a card to every single voter in this district that had my cell phone number on it. And I did that for a very important reason. I'm running to represent everybody in this entire district: Mount Pleasant, Sullivan's Island, Isle of Palms. My commitment is that I'm going to be accessible, I'm going to be transparent and responsive to my constituents. So not only am I talking the talk, I'm walking the walk, in that my cell phone is in every voting household of this district. I've spent the last 14 years giving back to this state. It's a state that I love, and it's my home. Even though I wasn't fortunate enough to be born here, it has become my home. And it's where we're raising our 2 children in our public schools. It's where I've given back to help domestic violence and sexual assault victims. It's where I've given back by serving my state in the solicitor's office. And I would ask you, the voter, to give me the chance to extend my service. So please vote for me for our open State House seat here in Mount Pleasant, Sullivan's Island, and Isle of Palms. Thank you.
Thank you. All right, let's go to District 112, 110, and we will start with Mr. Cogswell.
Again, thank you all for having us. Thank you all for hosting this. And let me start by just saying, giving a compliment to the fellow candidates, my opponent and the 2 members that are running for 112, for having a civil discussion and having a decent discussion. That is something that is utterly lacking in politics these days. And it's refreshing to get, even though it's on a Zoom call, in front of people and have civil discourse. And what I can say, that whoever wins in November, no matter which side of the aisle you're on, it'll be important to maintain that decency in working with the Charleston County delegation and the regional delegation in Columbia, because we need to work together to solve the problems that the Lowcountry faces. So again, I appreciate everybody putting, the League of Women Voters putting this on. And when it comes to who to vote for, I would just encourage the voters to do their homework. All politics, as I said earlier, are local. And it's important to make sure you know who you're voting for and not just pushing one party or the other. So again, I would urge you to just do a little research before you go into the ballot.
Thank you very much. Ms. Chingalani.
Mr. Cogswell, you took the words right out of my mouth. I really
Great minds
appreciate
think alike.
the civil conversation between us participants today. That's something that is really important to me, treating each other with dignity and respect. It's huge, especially now since everything has gotten, people's emotions have gotten so big. I do really appreciate that of all of you. I think you're right. We do just need to do our homework when we're deciding what we're doing in this election and how you want to vote. My vision for District 110 is to really address that $26 billion debt for the teachers. That's a priority for me, as well as raising the people who are in poverty out of poverty by helping them thrive, assisting them in allowing that to happen. That is something that is really important to me because it stabilizes the rest of the state on a very visceral level, and it's the right thing to do. So we really need to take care of each other in any way possible. And we also need to take care of our environment and make sure that it's sustainable. Every single decision I feel like that we're making with the state, we need to ask 3 questions. That's, how does this impact the environment? How does this impact equity of our citizens? And how is it affecting education? Are we progressing towards that? We should be definitely in the upper half of education among states, which we are not.
Thank you so much.
That's important.
It's really great. It's wonderful. And I just want to say that it's one of the greatest honors and pleasures of having the opportunity to moderate candidate forums. It's really a great chance to get to learn about really some of the amazing people we have in our state that are willing to put their names forward and to really let us know that our democracy is thriving by making sure that we have choices to make. And I want to encourage everybody to do, as the candidates have suggested, to really do your homework and look into it, and hope you've made it to the end of this video if you're watching it at home, and really understand the importance of your vote. So the other thing is just to make sure that we can celebrate these candidates. I'd like to ask everybody who's on the Zoom call just to kind of turn on their mics and their faces so we can have a little bit of applause in the audience and just really thank you all for participating. All right. Yay. Great things ahead for Charleston County's delegation, I think, from the other races I've been a part to participate in. We've got some great choices, and I hope everyone has a great weekend and make sure to vote. Thank you.